Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Zoom webinar. I'm your host, Peter Johnson, and I'm thrilled to be here with our very special guest and my personal friend, Libby Boatright. Today, we're going to talk about an area that's critically important and that most of us are not prepared for when we're eventually faced with it, and that is end-of-life planning. So today's presentation and interactive session is called The Last Things We Talk About, Your Guide to End-of-Life Transitions. Libby and I have been close friends since the mid-1980s when we were both financial planners associated with a firm called Judy and Robinson in Menlo Park. Since then, Libby has gone through a fascinating career evolution, and recently she published a book on her experiences in those roles, which the book's title is the same as this webinar's title. As a chaplain, pastor, and certified financial planner, Libby has worked alongside hundreds of families on end-of-life issues, loss and grief, composing memorials, working alongside lawyers with estate plans, and educating people with coping skills in the midst of crises. Libby is passionate about finding ways to organize a person's life fiscally and strategically, as well as educating people about decisions regarding life transitions. I'm going to bring up my my slides here, and we're going to launch that. It takes a high degree of skill, I want you to know. There we go. Okay, how's that looking, Libby? Is that good? Libby? Uh-oh. She's shaking her head. Let's see. Huh.
Hi, Peter. This is Pat Pierce. I can see the display just fine.
Oh, thank you, Pat. And you can hear me, I assume.
Yes,
Peter, I still can't hear you. I can't hear you on mine. So I hope.
Uh-oh. Well, let me, goodness sakes. Got one person trying to enter too. Let me go take care of Libby's volume. But the rest of you are hearing me, it sounds like.
Perfectly.
Great.
She might just be on mute in the bottom left.
I can't hear you on mine for some reason. So
Peter is so clever to have Libby right there.
there we are.
What a team.
All right, yes, I'm telling you.
And you got a cheerleader in the background. Who could ask for more?
Well, we have you, and
Well,
you complete the team nicely. I want to let one more person in. Okay, good.
and you are recording, correct?
We are recording this. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So today, the last things we talk about, a guide to end-of-life transitions with the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth T. Boatright, BCC, PCHAC, CFP, and other good stuff. Now, all right. I love this quote that Libby came up with or shared for the talk. Really, we are talking about an entire lifespan here and all the meaning in it and all the people we're connected with. So, picture of her and a note at the lower left that she has been, I'm not sure if you're still active, Libby, but relief chaplain in the oncology outpatient palliative care medicine department at Stanford Healthcare.
I'm still there.
And how many patients have you seen transition in one night?
Sadly, the top number was 11 people died in one night. And that was a very busy night. As some of my chaplain friends would tell you, that's pretty much running the whole time. And that particular night, I had someone from Scotland, I had another person from Mexico, and the rest were here from the United States. So we had a lot of work to do. But that can happen, especially in the age of COVID.
Mm. And there's a bunch of stuff I didn't know about Libby. She's got master's degrees. She's appeared on television. She had a radio show, published articles in Morning Star. Just absolutely amazing, really wonderful. And this is a picture, the cover of her book, which I have read and I've given away copies already. At the end of this talk today, we're going to be giving away 3 autographed copies. So stay tuned for that. I think this is actually worth reading, so indulge me. In the last things we talk about, Libby offers ways to put together a white book, a simple binder or flash drive of all the materials a family will need when one passes on their legacy. As one completes the exercise or exercises, the heirs will avoid what she calls the treasure hunt, the endless search for all the data lost in transition or hidden in corners and storage. More importantly, she offers the why for each area to motivate people to finish the project and get on with life. Another person coming in. So with that, welcome, Libby.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here, Peter. We go back so many years, it's hard to imagine that we're still on the same page. It's great. I am excited to be here today because I think this is an opportunity for all of us to take stock on the things that we're doing in our own life. And we're going to do 5 points today, very simple. Who am I? The star in the elevator. Something about our family and family dynamics, about the medical universe, about the financial and legal inventory, and finally, care and final days. I want to cover all of those topics, so we'll try to do it as quickly as we can. But I start with, who am I, the star in the elevator? I work at a very large hospital where there are 4 different complexes and many elevators. And one of the things that centers me every time I have to go somewhere, because I work all 4 facilities, is the star in the elevator. I figure out if I'm there, then I know where I need to go and I have a path, I have a map. And much of what we're going to talk about today is a map in terms of end of life and the things that we need to do. So I begin with, who am I? Where am I? Where am I in this universe? And I go back to a biblical reference where it says that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, Psalm 139, that we are so unique and our DNA is only made once in a lifetime in the universe. And what does that mean? How are we fearfully and wonderfully made? What makes us special? And we discover the inner soul of our person, what wakes us up every morning, gives us hope, the meaning and purpose of our life. When we get one of these horrific diagnoses where doctors just said you have 6 months or you have a year or you are going to be in chemo for the next year and a half, it really does make one ponder. It makes us stop and think. And so we start beginning to think of the things that really matter in our lives, what matters most, the meaning and the purpose, the things that inspire us. And who am I and what matters most to me? We can write letters of things of this. We can write a whole book, a chapter of our life about what matters most to me. I just finished doing some essays for Storyworth. And what that means, you get a prompt every week and you write your story. And so I was able to give my sons and our family meaning and purpose in my life, the things that matter. And then who makes up my concentric circles of support? I think of us kind of at the center of those concentric circles. And then we have the first level, which is our BFFs, the best friends, the 2 o'clock people that we can call in the middle of the night and say, hey, I need some help. Sometimes they're family members and sometimes they aren't, but they're people that really matter. And that's that second concentric circle. And the third one is the rest of our family. It's usually people that are good friends, the people that'll do our delegate some certain tasks, like take care of the dog or, take care of the kids or do some kind of task, bring a meal. when you're not feeling up to it. Do the errands and things that matter in your plan of care. And then the fourth circle is kind of people like our professional people, the doctors, nurses, the counselors, the people that we pay, and that help us with our plan of care and the things that we need. And finally, the fifth circle is pretty much everybody else, except those that you don't want anything to be said to. In other words, you may have some former spouses, you may have some children, wayward children in the background, and they're people that you really don't want to share that information. But those concentric circles allow us to kind of find out who it is we can call on, the people that we can delegate tasks to, the things that matter in our life and keep us going when things are really not great. If you're on a 90-day wonder program for a bone marrow transplant, believe me, you need concentric circles of support. You need to know who's there for you and who can do that work. You'll note at the bottom of the slide here, it says a handout, what matters most to me. Peter's going to give you an opportunity at the end of the talk today that if you want these handouts, which are part of the book, you can then sign up for those, and he'll be glad to get those out to you. But what matters most to me, ask all these questions. Who am I? Where am I? Who are the people that would miss me when I'm gone? Who will I miss? What are the things that are expectations that I want to get done, and so on. We had a patient not too long ago, and his one expectation was, I just want to get to my son's wedding in Mendocino. And so we said, okay, we've got chemo, we've got radiation, the things that are coming up in your schedule, we'll work it out so that we take care of a week and a half so that you can do this wedding in Mendocino and then come back and we'll start your regimen again. So he did that. And sure enough, that was the only expectation he had in terms of his own end of life wishes. And within 6 months, he was gone. But he had that one expectation. He wanted to meet it. And so by knowing his wishes, we could fulfill that for him. And so those are the things that matter. You think of all the priorities and the things that you want to do. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to cover today. And I know that Peter is encouraging questions in the chat. If you want to have questions later on in the time that we have together, I'll be glad to answer those as we have time today. The second one, we'll go on to the second slide, Peter, and that's on family. And I don't know about you, but everybody's got a unique family. I have a great family. I'm so blessed with the people that I have. We're very close and we talk and we share things. But I know there are other families in this world where they don't share, or they're kids that are kind of out on the edges, or you have people that are very controlling and they don't want you to know anything. Or you have families that are culturally sensitive and that to even talk about medical issues or to talk about something that's not right would be a point of dishonor. And so they have point people, and those point people talk to the doctors, and then if they feel like it, they might get back to you and let you know how really ill you are. Every family is different. There are dynamics that would just go from A to Z. So I think what I would ask people to do as they approach end of life is understand that family history. Who makes the decisions? Who's the point person? Who handles bad news? How do you handle medical news in your family? I've been in rooms where doctors are speaking. There's 21 members of the family there. And I've also been in rooms where there's nobody there except the patient. And the doctor can't say anything because the son or somebody else has said, I forbid you to tell her how sick she is. You tell me and I'll let you know what I'm going to tell her. So again, understand the family dynamic and the family systems and how that's going to work, because that's going to help you know about your condition, and it'll also inform the family, and you have hopefully a symbiotic relationship with your family and not one where it's stilted. The other thing I wanted to cover with family, and this is very important, are some very important documents that we cover in the medical universe. One of them is the Advance Directive. And for some of you outside of California, you might call that a living will. There's many different words for it. But an Advance Directive is like a permission slip. It gives people in your family or loved ones or people that you trust the opportunity, the permission to speak for you when you cannot speak for yourself. When you go into an operation and you do not come out communicating, you might be in a coma or semi-coma, there are people then on this document that will speak for you. And there's two requirements that I make for people on an Advance Directive. One is that they know the hospital. They know their way around a hospital. They know what a case manager is and a doctor and a nurse and all the others. But they also know you and they know your wishes. With those two things, then the Advance Directive becomes a very powerful document. I'm fortunate enough to have a husband who's a licensed clinical social worker and a sister who's a nurse practitioner, and they are my A-team. They are my wingmen. And so I know if I go into a hospital, those are the two people that are going to be able to really make it happen for me. You may not have those people in your family, but you will have people that you trust, and that advance directive can be very helpful. There are many stories that I could tell you. In fact, Peter, I know, has one as well, where advance directives have not been signed, legal papers have not been completed. And so all of a sudden, the doctors in the hospital do everything they can, and they run up the bill, and it may be things that you really don't want. And advance directives gives them direction and says, this is what I will do, and this is what I won't do. And therefore, you avoid what unfortunately has become the #1 reason for bankruptcies in the United States is medical expenses. So an advance directive helps you to stay away from that kind of trap. A POST is physician ordered for life-sustaining treatment. It's a pink form. It's very easy to see in a house. Most people keep it on the refrigerator. Some put it in the bathroom. Some put it next to the door of their bedroom. Many facilities have them right next to the bed where the person is residing. But it's an emergency form. It says that if you need emergency services, like an EMT or someone, you will tell them what you will do and what you won't do. It doesn't replace the advance directive, but it gives them very specific instructions of what you will tolerate. And it's signed by a doctor. An advance directive doesn't have to be signed by a doctor. That's just witnessed and done as a legal document. A POST, on the other hand, has to be signed by a doctor because they are giving permission for that emergency person to do the work that you've asked them to do. Then there's a HIPA form. HIPA form is very handy for people like myself, where you have a college student and you forgot to sign the HIPA form and they go into the hospital and you can't get any information on them. They're over 18. They do not have to disclose anything about this child. And all of a sudden, you're on the outside looking in and praying that you can find out what happened to your kid because they were in an accident. HIPAA forms are very, very important. So those are 3 forms that I would say for everyone, you need those. And if you have members of your family and they want to know how you're doing in the hospital, a HIPAA form also helps. You've given them permission to speak to the doctor about your situation. So the other thing that happens with families are what sort of living situations will change. In other words, you're going to be perhaps ill for quite some time or debilitated. And are there going to be people that are going to come in and help you? Or are you not going to have anybody because you live far away? My 2 children live in Iowa and Chicago. So if something happens to me, it's either Frank or a family member, or we've got to go to home care. So it's important to understand what the family will do and what they won't do. Is there someone in your family that's going to be assisting, or are they simply going to say, not me, you're on your own, and you have to start looking for home care and other things, which, by the way, is not covered. Home care is generally not covered. It's not a Medicare expense. So that's also something to consider financially. So how has COVID changed the landscape? A lot. A lot of people are saying, I'm not going to go to the assisted living anymore. I'm not going to go to congregate care. I want to stay home. But does every family say, sure, you can have the back bedroom? Probably not. So I'm suggesting that there may be some alternatives to congregate living. One of the hottest things here in California is an ADU, the accessory dwelling unit. Huge spark with all of this going on right now. For about $175,000, you can have a nice 1-bedroom, 1-bath in your backyard. And that saves people having to put you in assisted living or maybe memory care at the tune of, $7,000 to $12,000 a year. You look at that financially, Peter, you can do the numbers now. And you can say, wow, over time, that's going to save me a lot of money because now I have supervision for my loved one. They're close to the family. We don't have to live with them specifically, but they're close by. So an ADU has become very popular if you can possibly do it. Foster care and board and care arrangement sometimes works, especially if there's some mental issues. These are smaller housing situations with 5 to 6 people usually, and managed by a supervisor where a person can then, be in a large house or some kind of facility that manages this. This is very popular in Oregon. We call it foster care there. But again, it's something where you're closely supervised, you're not on your own, independent, and you have someone to really watch out for you. The typical thing, and this is not so popular now. It used to be back in the 50s and 60s and so on. You had a room in the family home. grandma got the last, she got the last bedroom, or grandpa, and they would be supervised by a family. But nowadays, this is a little less popular, simply because, sometimes families want to have autonomy, and the person themselves may want to have autonomy. But we're finding more and more people moving back. After COVID, they said, I don't want the congregate care. I don't want to take that risk. I'm going to move back to the family home if they'll just give me a room. And then finally, the assistance to retain independence in home care. And home care is not cheap. It's generally in the $30 an hour range. So you can do the math and assume how much that is. But for some people, they only need, 2 to 4 hours a day. And sometimes that, of course, then starts to accelerate as a person gets ill. But again, that's another alternative to, say, congregate care. So I just wanted to cover that as some things that are now trending in our landscape. So,
Libby,
yes.
I just want to remind everybody that if you open up your chat window on your Zoom app, you can type questions in and we can pass those along. Or if you have comments or something you'd like to share with the other people on the call, just your experiences, you can put it in there.
Well, Peter, if you want, this might be the time you could talk about your dad, because that was a very poignant story for me, and it certainly covers the medical and family that we've been talking about. Going back, there it is. Okay. So
I just made a discovery that when I unmute myself, the same button also forwards the slides.
Oh, okay. Well, there you are. Discoveries abound. All right.
Bad user interface. Yes, I could write a book on everything my family did wrong around estate planning. And, they were good people. They did their best, but like 12 chapters. And one of the chapters would be on my dad, who was a really bright guy, graduate of the Naval Academy and MIT, and top secret clearance, worked on spy satellites, all kinds of good stuff. But unfortunately, his health wasn't that good. And when he was 59, he went into a coma. And I was called to the hospital. And before I got to his room, the nurses sort of accosted me and said, do you want us to keep him alive, or do you want us to pull the plug? I said, I have no idea. I just got here. I haven't even seen him. I had no conversations with him about it. So we waited a little while. We found out that he had not signed his estate documents, even though he'd had them drafted, but he was thinking about them. So if engineers, they like to think about stuff in great detail, which slows them down quite a bit. So without having signed his estate documents, everything was going to go to his ex-wife, and I knew he wanted it to go to his son that he had with that ex-wife. And so we kept him alive, hoping that he would wake up enough to put an X on a signature line and establish his estate plan. Well, he didn't wake up, and we spent 59 days with him in the hospital. Thank goodness it was Kaiser and everything was covered, but that was probably about a $2 million medical bill. And we don't know if he was in pain, but he was, he was breathing. And that was a tough time. That was a tough time for me, for the family. And this is exactly what these forms that Libby's talking about would help avoid.
Yeah. You are the poster child, Peter, for this. Truly.
The poster adult.
Yeah, poster adult. Thank you. Poster adult for why we do the advanced directives and the pulse and everything else. It just saves so much sadness and confusion, really, because the intent was there, but unfortunately he didn't get things signed in time. So it became the usual chaos at the end of life.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
we do have a question too.
Sure. What's our question?
The question is, what would you recommend regarding long-term care insurance?
Sure. Thank you. Long-term care insurance is, first of all, very expensive. It depends on when you get it. If you're getting it in your 50s, it's generally affordable. If you're waiting until you're 70, it can get extremely pricey. One of the ways I recommend long-term care insurance is to try to do it through your employer if they offer it. I was fortunate enough to get it in my late 50s, and it's still affordable. Whereas if I'd gotten it now, it would have been $2,000 a month. So it can be extremely expensive. But what long-term care insurance does is it, pays through all the gaps and everything else that Medicare doesn't pay. It does allow for certain provisions to have home care if it's in that policy. There are a lot of different ways to look at it. There are different, as there is with Covered California, different levels and different costs. But I first would say, ask your employer if they offer it. And if they do it through the employer plan, because then you can get it to extend after you leave. And then secondly, go to an insurance broker and say, this is the kind of care I want to cover. What can you do for me? And then let them kind of tier that out in terms of what's affordable. And the second thing I would look at, of course, are deductibles and also copays, because often an insurance policy is cheaper because the deductible is higher and the copays are higher. So you want to find the perfect kind of match in terms of copays, deductibles, and cost. So that's where I'd start.
Great.
Okay, on we go.
On we go.
Medical. Well, this is my universe where I live right now. And I would say one of the things that is important to know is, what is a hospital doing? A hospital is a business. There are very few nonprofit hospitals. And so they have to look at the bottom line. They have to bill for everything. And so you're going to find when you see those bills, it's just, paper shock. So navigate the hospital by knowing who's in the hospital. In my book, I spend a lot of time defining all the terms, the people, the PTs and the OTs, the physical therapists, the occupational therapists, the case managers, the social workers, the nurses and nurse practitioners, the doctors, the physician assistants. Who does what and what are they in charge of? Navigating the hospital system is very important. And this goes back to, again, your AD and your pulse and who am I? What will you tolerate and what won't you tolerate? One of the things that always gets to me when people enter a hospital, they sign a million forms, or what seems like a million forms. And most of them are written by lawyers for lawyers. You generally don't spend the time looking through them and finding out what you're signing. I highly recommend you get there early enough to really read through some of this stuff, because obviously it's disclaimers and they're trying to do the best they can so they won't be liable for some of the problems that happen in the hospital. So navigating that hospital system, understanding what you're signing, and understanding your diagnosis are very important. That's why we talk about the next point, which is a goals of care conversation with the doctor and medical professionals. This is what you'll do and what you won't do. This is where your diagnosis is and what the prognosis is, what's ahead. This is the kind of procedures they're going to be doing, and can you handle it? In other words, some people have a weak immune system and it's very difficult to do chemo for a year. And so sometimes instead of intravenous work, they do pill work, they have pills. Or instead of radiation, they have different variations on ways to manage the cancer. Bone marrow transplant is 100 days. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to be near a hospital for 100 days. And whether you live at home and you're 20 minutes away or 30 minutes away, or you're actually in the hospital or near a hospital, living in a motel, that's the kind of thing you're looking at. And how does that affect your workplace? Or are you going to be able to continue to work, or do you have to go on disability? So those kinds of things, especially the disability question, is handled with a social worker. They look at short-term and long-term disability and how that impacts your life. Some people can continue to work, some can't, depending on the kind of procedure. So again, all of that's important in terms of your goals of care and talking that over with your doctor and your social worker and other people that are involved, counselors. As a chaplain, I'm working on just keeping you happy and motivated and, finding that spiritual core that keeps you going. But the doctor is doing, kind of the footwork. They're really working through your plan. The other thing I encourage people to find out is what's covered and what's not. We just talked about long-term care, deductibles and copays. The deductible gets, you end up paying that at the beginning, a $500 deductible, you pay that up front. And then a copay is 80% of the bill they pay and 20% you pay, as an example. So you have to kind of start thinking financially, what is this really going to cost me? And are there other gap programs or policies that I can put in that will pay some of this? I would hate to say that people would not get a procedure done simply because of finances. There are ways to make that work. And that takes us to the next point, which is advocating for your rights. One of the things that I encourage people to do is go and see the financial planning department to find out, are there ways to cover the things you can't cover? Are there beneficence programs that will cover some of the things you can't afford? We have many, many people that come and clearly with $1 million bill, as Peter pointed out, they can't cover all of that. It's impossible. And they have to work out a plan. Unfortunately, a lot of hospitals, instead of working out a plan, put you on a credit bureau. And that seems rather tragic. So you may want to try to avoid that and say, how much can I pay up front so that I don't have to go to this credit bureau and be on their red list, while I'm trying to pay off this medical bill. There are many stories where people say, I just can't afford this, and it's gonna have to go to the credit bureau, and that's gonna be the end of it. We want to get ahead of that curve. We want to find out what it is we can afford and what we can't afford, and can we get ahead of that and try to find other resources to make sure we pay for it. And who will stand up for you when you can't speak for yourself? Sometimes I'll just, and I feel like a social worker sometimes, but I'm talking to a patient and they say, well, my doctors can't decide. And so the surgery's been put off for another 6 days. And I go, what? So I will step in and I'll say, have you talked to a patient advocate? Have you talked to an ombudsman or someone who can help you settle this? It shouldn't be the doctors arguing. It should be you making the decision that you need to get this done. And so sure enough, once I did that and I called the patient advocates for the hospital, this person had an advocate in their room that day and the surgery happened the next day because they wanted to get that settled. They don't want to have malpractice or anything else. These are people that will help you settle issues when you can't settle them for yourself. So again, I tend to be very pro-advocate, patient advocate, trying to get the things done that you need to get done and not try to just sit back and expect the doctor to handle it, because sometimes they can't get into that argument. And so it becomes something where you have to settle it. So on the handout, you'll notice the questionnaire is, what are my goals of care? So again, that's another handout that you'll get with Peter's when you let him know that you'd like that handout. We'll make sure you have that. But those are some of the things that I tell people to really watch for in medical.
Libby, question from me.
Okay, Peter.
We're throwing out a lot of data. We're throwing out a lot of work. How can people get started and stay with this? This has to be harder than an exercise program to stick with.
Yeah.
How do people take bites of this and keep going and get through it all?
Well, again, it sounds like a broken record, but I would encourage you to read the book because there are papers in the back of the book that will help you kind of navigate this. So you start with who am I and what matters to me, and then the goals of care. And then eventually we get to the inventory, which we're going to do next. But the idea is you do this on your time and with your energy. I would hate to have anyone say, I've got to get this done in a week when you may not have the data or anything else. You do it on your time. You say, these are the things I can get done today. And then maybe next week I'll take this next goal in mind. I think it's important to think about this as a marathon and not a sprint, that you have certain paperwork that you can do very quickly, and other paperwork that's going to take time. When you get to the eulogy and the memorial planning and all of that, that takes time because that's hard thinking about yourself not here. And so I encourage that kind of towards the end. But it's important planning, because I can tell you story after story of people that said, I just want to do, a cremation. And their family went ahead and did a $25,000 burial with the, mahogany casket and the whole thing. And it wasn't that wasn't their wishes. So again, it's on your time, your schedule, with your energy. Take the time, consider it a marathon, and do maybe a sheet, one worksheet at a time, and then get to it as you can. Does that make sense, Peter?
It does. I'm wondering about maybe having an accountability partner or something.
That would be
wonderful.
That would be wonderful. Someone that could say, let's do this together, and we'll do this week, and we'll do this the next week. Or someone who's a counselor that would just say, I really want you to be accountable to me. And so we'll make up a list or a kind of a calendar of what we'll get done each week And then at the end of maybe 6 months, you've completed your book. You've got your white book together, your flash drive, or whatever it is that you plan to do. But the worst thing to do is to put it off, because again, I think of those dear people that died yesterday, and they didn't think, what the day would be like. And all of a sudden now their family is, thinking about memorials and burials and things of that sort. Having this done in advance gives them a lovely legacy so that they can do the things that you wish.
I do think that books are such a wonderful tool. They're very affordable, $20 or whatever, and you get lots of information that you can go through at your own speed and you can get educated on. They really are a wonderful technology that's been around for a few hundred years.
Yeah.
And your book is available on Kindle as well, which is
yes, it's digital as well. So you don't have to worry about paper. You can be ecologically sound. Okay, well, why don't we go on to inventory, because our time's moving along here. So one of the things, okay. So one of the things that I am very, very clear on, and it certainly was in my own life, my parents died within a year of each other, and there was a lot of paperwork. My dad was wonderful. He collected things. He did wonderful files, but we didn't know where everything was. And then when Mom died a year after that, it just became even more paperwork. So I just say avoid the treasure hunt. Get it in one place where your kids know where it is. The inventory of the essential information and resources. This would be all of your financial background. And I'm thinking of you, Peter. He does a wonderful job of consolidating all of your investments and so on. So you get this one report. The kids can read that, know where everything is. As a financial planner, that's a blessing. But if you don't have a financial planner and you haven't picked out Peter, and I hope you do, you have the opportunity to do this on your own. So you have essential information. The things that are involved here are all of your assets, your liabilities, your payments that you make every month, the automatic payments, the things that if you died today, what would your family be facing? And so you get that in one inventory. And resources, other things like your insurance, your Social Security, your military records, because a lot of people don't know that the military provides a very, very lovely service and a place to be buried in a military cemetery. And they even give you a small stipend to help you out with that. So those kinds of things are lovely to have for a family to say, okay, Dad's passed away. Now here's the file. We can get started and start moving the accounts, getting the death certificates, getting all of these accounts changed over, or if it's in a trust, then the trustees take over. Whatever it is, get the inventory done. I can't say enough about that. We spent close to 2 years getting everything straightened out for my mom and dad, and bless my brother-in-law, Frank, who did just an incredible job, and we were able to get it all sorted out. But without that, you're at the mercy of just all these files that are randomly placed together, and people are just saying, well, I don't know, just find it, and 6 months later you find out there was a debt that didn't get paid, and now it's in interest and penalties, or there was a tax issue that hadn't been resolved, and all of a sudden now you have to pay the interest and penalties, and the IRS is after the estate. So things like that are just, they're simplified if you get them in one place, and then your family knows. Now when I say that, put them in one place, but you don't have to tell them what's in there. In other words, you just give them the place, and then they're not snooping around with all of your financial business and the things that you want to know. Just let them know it's there. And so when you pass away, they have the book, they can take it down off the shelf and begin their work. Passcodes are very, very important. I cannot tell you how many people that I've talked to in my practice where they didn't have any passcodes, they didn't have anything. And so now the phone's out, their computer's out, their bank accounts they can't get into, with a death certificate, normally you can make those transfers and so on. But passcodes, a separate sheet on passcodes and, passwords, and not with the white book. You have to put it somewhere else. Because if someone finds that white book and they have your passcodes, all of a sudden you get hacked. Recently, I've just been hacked, and it was really a horrible experience. So the passcodes are separate from the white book. You put them in a jewelry box or in maybe the safety deposit box, but not in the same book as your inventory. And then I encourage people to write out their special requests and gifts. My grandmother, Gagi, who was a wonderful, wonderful woman, she decided that when she died, she didn't want to have anything really that she had to give away. So she made a list, a beautiful inventory of everything that she had, furniture, keepsakes and so on, gave it to all the grandchildren and children. We picked our top 3. She loaded it on a truck and the truck drove around the country and delivered all the goods. When she died, she had 1 piece of furniture. There were no arguments. There was no issues in terms of probate or anything else, because there was nothing to argue over. We all got exactly what we wanted. It was a beautiful, I call it Santa Claus on 4 wheels, a beautiful gift to us. And so those bequests and gifts are then treasures that your kids and grandkids can have. So I encourage you to think about that as well. So putting your house in order and making specific directions on how to unlock that estate is very important. It can be done, again, on a flash drive, on a CD, in a book, whatever it is, but let the kids know where it is. They don't have to know the contents, but order it in such a way that if you died tomorrow, they know exactly what to do. So what I have as a handout is a checklist of the essential information and documents. It really does very specific listing of all the things that have to be done.
Libby, you just reminded me of.
So, yes, thank you, Petra, my Dutch mom in love. Yeah.
You just reminded me of the potential for families to have fights over things when there are no clear directions, especially over sentimental objects. So families will fight over money, but they'll also fight over the grandfather clock or whatever it might be. Have you got a quick story about a family that had a falling out when things didn't go smoothly, or a family that had the opposite, brought closer together because things were
Yes.
organized?
Well, I think, I have both, but the one that normally happens with divorce, they argue over a couch that's maybe worth $15 in a garage sale, and it costs them $1,500 to argue it. And that's true in probate and, estate planning as well. But my favorite story, and I think my brother's listening, is that when my mom and dad both died, the one thing that he wanted, 2 things that he wanted, was a stadium blanket with giants on it and his Pinocchio wastebasket. So bro, if you're really listening, I love that story because those were mementos that meant something to him. And they were precious. He didn't care about the furniture. He didn't care about the silverware. He wanted things to remind him of his parents. And the stadium blanket was reminders of his dad, our dad, Leroy. And then the Pinocchio basket was something he grew up with. So those are the 2 things he wanted. I thought, hallelujah. There was no argument on that. Nobody else wanted that. But those are the things he wanted. And the rest of us, we got silverware, and some of us got, dressers and all sorts of things. But how precious to know that those are the things that mattered. That brought him meaning and purpose. So bro, if you're listening, God bless you. It's a great story. Okay, so that handout will also be available when you sign up. David's listening, he's laughing. Okay, I see it. Okay, so understanding care and final days. We got a few minutes. Yeah, we got about 15 minutes, and that'll handle hopefully some questions as well. One of the things I think people misunderstand is the continuum of care. And we're going to kind of go back to the hospital universe now. But one of the things that people may not understand is what palliative care is and hospice and so on. So let me just kind of go over that so you understand. The first thing that a lot of people do is we do outpatient. We go see our doctors, it's the kind of yearly checkup, the things that, maintenance kind of things, maybe an x-ray once in a while, or, a blood sample, or, certain procedures that are done every certain years. That's outpatient, and that's kind of the lowest end of the spectrum in terms of the continuum of care. Then you may find out you have to have a surgery, or you're going to have a baby, or you're going to have something else, and so that's inpatient. And there it's a little bit more constrictive. So you don't have the choices you have with outpatient, where you come and go and you're in your car. Inpatient says now you have a bed, you have excuse me, people that are going to be coming to your room, generally in white coats, sometimes 8 and 9 at a time, to see how you're doing. And so you don't have as many choices. You're pretty much confined to your bed with food that may not be the best, and a lot of people that are going to be doing procedures to get you ready for whatever it is you're doing in the hospital, or it may be an emergency. Palliative care is important to know is not, hospice. One of the things that I try to inform people about palliative care, it is managing symptoms. So palliative care is really working parallel to your primary care physician. So in other words, you may have some specific pain issues and your primary care physician isn't going to deal with that, but they'll give you to the palliative care physician who knows exactly how to deal with that pain. Or maybe there's depression, or maybe there's other issues, GI tract issues. All sorts of things can happen under palliative care, but they work alongside your inpatient or your PCP person. It's not like it's end of life. So I really want to get that straightened out because a lot of people don't understand that. In that same continuum, though, of palliative care is hospice. And hospice is primarily for the last 6 months of life. It is ordered by doctor. Doctor has to sign off on hospice. And it generally means that we're going to take away all of the curative care issues, the things that kind of prop us up and extra medicines and the things that keep us going. And we're going to really concentrate now on comfort and on end of life issues that give us joy and give us appreciation of life, so that those last 6 months are pleasant. And those last 6 months are generally spent at home with your family and doing the things, maybe those last things, as our gentleman that went to Mendocino wanted to get those last things done, and he was able to do them. Generally doesn't require a lot of curative care. You often are not on as many medications. When you're on hospice, you also have many things provided for you, like a bed and oxygen and all of the different equipment that you need at home that you normally pay for. Hospice pays for those. So it's really a blessing in many cases for people that are just at that point where they don't have to try as many things anymore. They're kind of out of the curative care world, and now they're in the palliative care world of hospice. In the last few days or last hours of life, there's comfort care. And this is normally to palliate in such a way that it simply keeps the person dry, comfortable, and resting in peace. And those are usually, ordered once a person organ starts to shut down and we know that the end of life is near. So I wanted you to see that continuum because there's a lot of misunderstanding with that. And the expectation is that each stage will have slightly different expectations in terms of medication, in terms of care, and all the other things that are involved. So what about home care? Let's say that you just finished a surgery, you're going home, you have people that will come by, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, maybe a social worker. Those kinds of things are involved in your regular kinds of care. But then if you go into hospice, you also get the added benefit of a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, someone that will come to your house. You have 24-hour access to a doctor or nurse over the phone. So those are things that are important to know, that it's not just, just don't go home and kind of go to die, as my mom would say, go to the home. You have services that are available. And so then when do I know I need these things? Well, we have a thing called the activities of daily living. And sometimes these are the kinds of things like dressing and toileting and feeding and so on that kind of dictate whether or not we're going to need home care or whether we're going to go to assisted living or whatever that is involved. So usually your occupational therapy person or your physical therapy person will be able to assess that along with the nurse. So let's talk about visitation, hospital and home. Right now, there have been so many changes in COVID. I kind of call where I work Fort Knox. You really can't get in unless you have a very specific reason, or a person's about to die, or there's a specific procedure that's going on and they need you to be there to accompany the person. A lot of changes in the age of COVID. I think these are going to be released fairly soon, certainly after June 15th. Have someone come in and sing to you. You may have someone that you would really like to talk to on FaceTime. I have put together Zoom calls for people with 25 relatives, singing hymns, reading scriptures, doing all these end of life things that have been so beautiful, and it's given closure to a person so that they can go in peace. And I just want you to know that there are many, many creative ways that people can visit without actually being present in person. So consider those kinds of things if you're unable to visit that loved one that you know is in the hospital. And then you as a person, if you're trying to think about your final days, what is it you want to do? Do you want to have people singing, singing around your bed? Do you want to have them reading your favorite poems? Do you want to have them sharing a recipe with you, and maybe you eat your hospital food and on the Zoom call, they're having their meal and you have this meal together? I'll just tell you one story. I had a lady, 93 years old, and she was on not comfort care yet, but very close. She was in a hospice situation at the hospital. Her daughters were there. The doctor had come in and said, things aren't looking good. It's going to be a couple of days. We'll just put her on comfort care. And so let's say our goodbyes now. And I thought, dang, this lady's, she's full of life. She really wanted to kind of go out with her fist in the air. So I found out she was a musical comedy person. And so I thought, oh, you've got the wrong chaplain. So what I did was I sang every musical comedy song I knew. We had a concert. We brought in doctors and nurses and they were singing along. We did hymns. We did all sorts of things. We were going to celebrate her life at the end. And it was just the most beautiful time. I mean, people in the halls were stopping and coming in and singing along with us. We had laughs. We had jokes. We did all sorts of things just to let her know her life mattered and she was special. And it was addressing what she wanted, which was having her family around, telling good stories. And of course, we added the music component. I tell you, she went out with a smile on her face. She didn't die until about 3 days later. But having that party, having that last sprint, having a chance to express what she loved in her life was so special. Think about those things. Think about the person that you're working with and what would bring inspiration and joy to their life. So then the other thing is planning the memorial and the burial and the eulogy. In the book, I talk a lot about eco burials because a lot of that's a new thing right now, becoming part of the earth or becoming compost or, so on. Others, simple cremations are fine, burials are fine, whatever you decide to do, caskets and so on. But getting that done in advance really helps your family because not everybody knows you want to be sprinkled over Pacific Grove, or they may not know that you really would like a mahogany casket and you want to go to Forest Lawn. I mean, there's so many alternatives to this. So by preparing these handouts, the body disposition, memorial planning, getting your eulogy done, your obituary planning worksheet, all of those things then make it much easier for the family. They know your wishes. You know what kind of flowers you want. You know what songs you want, scriptures or special readings or whatever it is. You got it all down. I tell the story in the book of Ollie. We had one. Ollie was a gentleman who was a corporal in the Army, and he decided he wanted everything very, very well planned out. So he wrote a book that had all of his memorial, burial. He wrote his eulogy, he wrote his obituary, he gave directions to his wife and how much he loved her and, all the stories they had. He told his pastor what sermon he wanted at the memorial. He told him, I want this sermon. I know what day you preached it, so you're going to do that. He also told his daughters what they were going to receive and so on. He had everything planned out. And I remember that I was with him the night he died, and he was at such peace because he knew everything was planned. So anyway, it's such a beautiful story. So when he died, his family each got a book. His wife got a book, his financial planner got a book, his pastor got a book, and his 2 daughters got a book, and everybody knew exactly what he wanted, and we just carried out his wishes. It was incredible. I mean, versus what I had with another person, her name was Lucille, with the family is still arguing 6 years later. They didn't get the funeral done right. They didn't want anybody there. They had nothing good to say. I mean, it was just horrible. It's the worst thing for a pastor to go with a family and say, well, what would you like me to say about your mom? Nothing. It's like, what? So that was hard. And I had to say, no, that's not going to work. We need to find 5 things that you remember about her that were positive, and then I'll do your service. Well, that was hard, but we got it done. But I'm saying, the differences are just so vast. So you prepare your family for the loss. You let them know the kinds of things you want, the tributes, you say your goodbyes, and then you go in peace. So anyway, if you have these planning worksheets, it really helps them to know what it is you want. So Peter, I've come to the end of my notes, and I'm not sure
Okay.
if we have questions or things that we want to cover, but I'm happy to do that.
Well, a couple of quick things. Libby has a website, and this is a picture of the homepage where you can buy the book. I do recommend it. Honestly, it's up to date. It's thorough. It's like a reference work. It does have all these checklists in it and so on. And Libby can be reached at her website or at AOL.com. You might want to jot these down because I'm going to go to a different slide in a minute. You can order the book through Bull Publishing or Amazon. And Libby is available for speaking. She certainly has a lot of experience, and she's getting a lot of requests right now from churches to do series and podcasts and all kinds of things. And if you wanted to hire Libby for some consulting by the hour, we talked about this yesterday, and she will explore that opportunity or that kind of approach. So email address is etboat2b@aol.com. And we won't get into how you got that email address today. If you send me an email and just request the webinar package or some wording to that effect, I will send you the questions and checklists, which were called handouts in the slides. I'll send you the slides as a PDF so you have them. We will post a link to the recording. You'll get that and notices of future programs. And if you're one of the first 3 people to respond, you'll get an autographed copy of the last things we talk about. And I think that is it. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself and feel free to jump in. And if not, Libby, what motivated you to write the book?
Oh gosh, I think just to educate people on what can be done and to avoid the treasure hunt. You know, we had such an interesting time with my parents, and we managed to get through it. But I think how much easier it would have been had everything been kind of plotted out and put into a book or someplace where we could get to it. So the motivation was simply to avoid the treasure hunt and help others to get these things done in advance. So you leave a really lovely legacy to your heirs. Let them know that you love them and do this work now.
And what is the biggest common problem that you've seen?
Oh, I think the biggest common problem is disorganization, you know, not putting everything in. It does take a little time to find out the full inventory and, you know, get everything in one place. I think a lot of people forget, oh, I forgot about that bill. I forgot about that thing that's due, you know, every 6 months. And I forgot to tell them about the insurance and so on. Take the time, just kind of do a brain dump, as you will, and get it all on paper, organize it, and then you save your heirs a lot of problems. I think that's the big thing, because the surprises aren't fun, especially when they have to do with taxes, or especially when they have to do, let's just give you an example, a basis on a house. They have to sell the house and they don't know the basis of the house plus the expenses. It becomes a very expensive mistake. So that's another thing that's in the inventory, is to get that basis done. And so if they do have to sell the house, they have a way to manage the finances on it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I just want to, I guess, mention something, which is it's wonderful to do that snapshot, but then 6 months go by and, you know, things have changed. Even worse, a year goes by, because maintaining that is, you know, somewhat of a nightmare. So especially if you have a significant number of accounts. So I guess I'm I don't know there's any way around it, but you have to, not just make it, but you have to maintain it.
That's a good point. Is it Josh that's speaking?
Yes.
Oh, Josh, absolutely. About every 6 months, I update things. I take out the old stuff, put in the new things. And if there's been any changes, I make sure that that's in the inventory so people know what accounts are still valid and what are not. In other words, if you say you decided to liquidate something and it's still on your list, you need to make sure that's taken off so people don't think, well, where is it? Those are the kinds of things. Yeah, every 6
They
months.
go searching for a
we
bank
update
account
those.
that you closed.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I
This is
did.
the
I
account
went
closed.
searching for a safe deposit box. My parents, I don't know if they closed it or not, but I was never able to find it. The bank had changed to a different company and they had no records and that whole deal.
Yep.
So yeah, it's especially when my parents were their health was failing, they wouldn't be able to maintain this. So
Right.
the best you can do is do it while you're active.
Exactly. And you may, as the kind son, help them out a little bit, at least get it organized in such a way that you'll know what to do should they pass away.
Yeah.
But absolutely, updates, I generally think every 6 months is a good update time because that's what's given when a person dies. You have either the date of death or the 6 months later in terms of valuation. So that's a good kind of rhythm to have every 6 months to update.
Well, you can do what I do. What I had to do, which is go back 6 years and check, Zillow and try and figure out what the prices were and hope the IRS doesn't challenge you.
Right. Yeah.
Another question.
Sure.
Another question to change the topic a little bit. Long-term care insurance. I know you mentioned it, but that's a bigger topic. But could you spend couple more minutes on what are things to look for and at what point do you pull the trigger on the long-term care insurance?
Pull the trigger in terms of letting it go or keeping it, or what would?
Buying it.
Okay.
Buying it,
Yeah.
and then I guess at some point you might, with a obvious injury or malady, your bills would come, and that's when you would use it. But
Right.
the other,
Okay.
you don't have to, right?
Right. No, you never have to, but you're paying a lot of money to, in order to keep it going. So first things first, I mentioned about deductibles, copays, and the cost. And usually those are all dependent on your age because they're, as any insurance company would do, they're banking on you to, as you're younger, it's unlikely you're going to use it. As you get older, you will. And so the cost goes up as you get older. The second thing I would look at, of course, is what's covered. And so for a lot of people, there's this certain amount of money that's covered each day with Medicare up to 120 days. And after that, then you're really in the soup. So basically you want to know how much they're going to cover per day. Is it $225, $300 a day? And how long will that go? In other words, is it for forever? But, or is it just for a certain amount of time that they'll pay for it? The third thing that I would think is important, and what are the provisions? Is it just going to pay for home care? Does it pay for home care and certain types of procedures?
Yeah, some
will
do.
It cover
right?
anything
some
as
will
a
cover
gap
home care,
policy
some
for
won't.
hospital expenses that I can't pay for?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So these are all provisions to look for. And you start with what you think you're going to need. Is it home care because you don't plan to live in an assisted living or a congregate care? You plan to stay at home. So if that's your platform, you start there and say, this is what I'm going to need when I get to a point where I can't use it. So look at what's covered. Look at, how long the length of that policy is going to go, because sometimes they stop, they start maybe at 120 days after Medicare is done. And then it goes for a certain period of time, maybe 2 to 3 years, and then it stops. Others might go on for a lifetime because you paid into a sizable amount of money. So length of service, kinds of services, copays, deductibles. And then if there's any other things that are exceptions, let's say an accident versus, just a procedure at hospital, sometimes they can get very much in the weeds. And so you want to look at this is the kind of thing where you really do read every word and find out if there's any termination. If there's a termination clause, in other words, if you haven't met the specifics of that policy, is there a possibility that would be terminated by the company? So that's a really scary part too.
Yeah, always payment termination. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Good question.
We had a question come in from Petra, who had to leave, but she had this to say in the chat. I have to log off, but just want to mention that when you are an immigrant or a permanent resident, there are specific details to keep in mind and to do research about. For example, our oldest son can only be the executor of our estate through a living trust.
Right. Exactly. And we have so many people living in the Bay Area that are in differing points of their green card or non-green card, or, you know, whatever status they have. So that's really important to check.
And each state has their own estate rules as well. So
Exactly.
if you got an estate plan drawn up by an attorney in California and then you move to Phoenix or something, Arizona especially has a lot of interesting rules. We have a lot of elderly folks and yeah, a lot of different aspects to look at if you move around.
And may I say the same thing too, Peter? This is a really good point, that when you buy some of these programs through a funeral home, and you know, you assume that it's going to have reciprocity between the states, it doesn't always travel. So be very careful what you buy in terms of these legacy programs, or, you know, there are different companies that offer these packages, if you will, for burial and for, you know, burial sites and so on, because not all of them travel. And so you paid all this money for this state, but you end up dying in Ohio, and maybe it won't have reciprocity. So be very careful about those as well.
You have any other questions out there? Had a nice turnout.
Okay.
Maybe not. Well, we're a little over time, and that's okay. Getting questions is a good thing. Libby, thank you so much for all the work that you do, you know, and your generous spirit. She has wonderful stories about things she does with her family, little charitable fund they put together when the parents died. Perhaps we'll get to share that another time. Again, feel free to send me questions or request for the materials from today, and we'll get those off to you. And as I said, the first 3 people get autographed copies of the book, which is cool. And that's it. We'll have another seminar soon, I'm sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. It's been fun.
Thank you, Libby.